Hello!
Hello.
Welcome to Weird, the people, the myths, the artifacts. It is me, your host, Archie King, with today's guest hosts, the Pale Father.
I am not pale, but I can live with that.
Yes, I live with a Viking. You can imagine him with a massive Viking beard, a samurai top knot, and gray hair all around.
It's not gray. It's platinum blonde.
And today we're going to talk about the most terrifying natural thing on planet Earth.
Aliens. Lizard people.
I'm sorry that threw me. Yes, he does that a lot. We're going to talk about the most deadly living and non-living things ever. We're going to talk about plagues. Alright, so I'm going to start us off with talking about what has been termed the Forgotten Plague. And it's forgotten because it was kind of overshadowed by two major developments. And that was the Spanish flu epidemic
1919 Spanish flu.
and the world wars.
Both of which were horrible.
Both of which are horrible, both of which had way higher death tolls than this. But I feel like that this is more aesthetically horrifying because those killed you. These locked you into your body most of the time. Alright, so I'm going to talk about encephalitis lethargica, which officially occurred between 1917 to 1928, though we felt the effects for decades. Alright, so the symptoms of encephalitis lethargica are high fever, headache, double vision, delayed physical and mental response, lethargy, and fatigue. Acute symptoms of encephalitis lethargica are abnormal eye movements, upper body movements, upper body weakness, muscular pains, tremors, neck rigidity, behavioral changes, including psychosis.
That sounds like 10 years in the army.
Actually, so there was a guy called Rene Chaffaut. It's French. And he believed that he was documenting encephalitis lethargica. But the other guy, Constantine von Economo, believed that only one of the patients suffered from encephalitis lethargica, and the rest of them were just suffering from what was at the time considered military fatigue, but would later be considered post-traumatic stress disorder, overstressed, stuff like that. And I actually have a video here. The rest of you can find it on YouTube in the by the YouTube channel Welcome Library, WELL come library. And I don't know how they found it, but they found a actual video from 1925 about acute encephalitis lethargica. And if you want to see what we're talking about, or at least the early stages, then I recommend that you check it out. Alright, I'm going to show it to the Pale Father. It says, the patient showed almost complete anesthesia of the right side, which lasted for 4 weeks. Also ataxia, disturbance of equilibrium, and tendency to fall over to the right side. You can see a person limply standing and falling and needing to be catched.
The person definitely looks fully conscious during this video. But there's like no I have no way of explaining this besides there's just no energy. Looks like they're just standing and then flop, standing and flop, like you're passing out, but you're not.
In the 8th week, the patient began to grow somnolent. The patient is completely orientated and ready to react rationally to any command. All right.
So now we got a person sleeping.
Not sleeping.
Not sleeping. Well, laying in a bed.
And they're asking her to touch her nose.
The patient has motor control. Seems to be responding well.
Whilst performing the finger-to-nose test, the patient goes to sleep. You can see that she's trying to touch her finger to her nose.
Looks like at this point the brain signals just quite aren't getting to where it needs to be. The person is clearly trying, but this is just, it's not happening. Wait, and no. Maybe, drum roll.
They're tapping her.
They're tapping her to keep her mind, awake.
She's trying. She can't. This is sad.
Yeah, this is really sad.
I'm glad that we have this video to show us what these people were going through. But this kind of clinical thing, it just really got to me, first time I watched this. Alright. Well, now that we got the personal stuff, we can try and soldier on. But I highly recommend that you guys watch this video so you understand what was going on. Alright. So, the causes of encephalitis lethargica aren't known. We have theories. Alright, so one of the original theories was that it had something to do with the Spanish flu epidemic, but there was no correlation.
Fun fact, when something is unknown, it's called idiopathic.
Idiopathic?
Idiopathic means unknown reasons.
Alright. But a new theory has emerged at some point. I can't remember when this theory emerged. That it was caused by streptococcus bacteria, which causes strep throat. So that's a fun fear for you to have.
I've had strep throat more times than I can count. I really don't want to have it again.
Because my sister, who you guys know as Crimson, told me while I was researching this that it's possible that this thing is still occurring, but we just don't know any cases of it because we don't have the right stimulus for it. So next time you get strep throat, you might be locked in your body for 40 years. So there are actually two more symptoms that from the base strain. And I say base strain and I'll explain that in a minute. And that was post-encephalitic Parkinson's. And which if you know Parkinson's, it's basically your body's betraying you. You're suffering from tics all over. You can't really move by yourself. And it's terrifying. And there's an impulse control disorder. All right, so children that were affected by the illness would attack others, attack themselves. They were terrified of what they were doing, not like true psychosis. And they were horrified, and they wanted to be locked away for their safety and other people's safety. And that's what happened. They would go to asylums and jails, or they wound up killing themselves, which is sad and terrifying. That's like every that's like every worst internal conflict in every show ever. You know what your body is doing is wrong, but
you
you're
can't.
powerless to stop it.
It's kind of like a body snatcher.
Yeah.
Or rabies. Think of it like rabies. Rabies, you lose all control. The fatality rate of rabies is, 100%. You're pretty much going to die. 99, something like that. You lose control, you attack people, you snap, you bite. Modern zombie plague.
Alright, so encephalitis lethargica was first described by Konstantin von Economo, who I'm surprised I can't find much more about this guy. Because from the few sources that I found, he was an avid pilot. He did hot air balloons in his spare time. He was a baron. He lived a very full life, and he turned to science. And when he did, his wife was worried that he would lose interest in flying. And he said that he's already lost interest because there's not much new to do there. While in silence, there was an endless flow of new. The first part was the quote, the other part was paraphrasing.
Okay.
And remember and there was a guy called Rene Chauffet. I believe I already talked about him.
I think so.
So they had a little bit of a tiff. And in France, encephalitis lethargica was called Chauffet's disease, where in Vienna, where von Economo was based, it was called encephalitis lethargica. Oh, I lost my notes. 1 second. And the thing is that I believe it was his mother that told him about an earlier disease called Nona, which happened a few decades prior. I don't have the exact date. And so he gathered all the symptoms and all the information he could about Nona, and he determined that it was an exact copy of encephalitis lethargica, that they were the same disease, which led to some people to believe that encephalitis lethargica has been around for centuries and inspired many folk tales and fairy tales where sleeping played a core element, like Rip Van Winkle, Sleeping Beauty, stuff like that. And it's in a later date, 1918, England, there was a new strain in encephalitis lethargica, which was characterized by hyperkinetic bouts. People were jumping up and down with no control over their body. They were running around, terrified of what was happening to them. And this strain of bacteria had a 50% mortality rate because people's respiratory systems were getting paralyzed for the rest of their body.
That would suck.
And there is a story that actually had a happy ending in this terrifying, depressing tale, about a woman that was in a coma for 3 months, and her husband realized that she loved remembering that she loved music, decided to play music to see if that would help her, and it did. And people thought that this was a cure, but it wasn't. Um, and that thus ends the first part of the encephalitis lethargica story. But several decades later, in the 1940s, 1950s, uh, the people that were infected by encephalitis lethargica were paralyzed, unable to move without some sort of outside will. Um, and this person, Oscar Oliver Sacks, came to a asylum that had encephalitis lethargica patients, and he did everything he could to make their lives better. He brought their family. He helped them move because they needed will, but it wasn't really living. And then this drug called levodopa or L-dopa came out, and the effects were pretty remarkable because people that couldn't move and were locked in their bodies for decades were moving and drawing and talking and singing and all that stuff and doing all these higher function things. And they would go on for a short period of time. But eventually the drug wore off. They grew a resistance to it and they were locked back in their bodies. And I felt like it was heartwarming and depressing at the same time when I first heard this story, because they got to live one last time. Uh, and they get but they never got to live again after that. They were locked forever. All right. And now, to change things up a bit, my co-host, the Pale Father, will tell us about a disease that he's picked out. And here he is.
I do this today in the honor of the blood god. So today I have chosen Ebola. Now, Ebola is a hemorrhagic fever. For you people who do not know what hemorrhagic means, it means it affects the hemoglobin and the blood. Okay, so you're going to bleed out of almost every orifice with this disease. Now, the largest outbreak of Ebola in modern times that has been noticed was the 1976. Two simultaneous outbreaks. It wasn't, well, I take that back. It wasn't the largest, but this is where it was first found. So in 1976, two simultaneous outbreaks of Ebola happened at one time. One in Nazura, a town in South Sudan, and the other one in Ukumba, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Ebola wasn't really discovered until that time, and it was named for the river that it was found next to, which was the Ebola River. Now, Ebola has an infection rate between 25 and 90%, and that also goes with the death rate. So it's actually a pretty scary thing. Imagine having a disease with a mortality rate of 25 to 90%, with the typically being 50% or more, rampaging through everything. Imagine if it rampaged through, let's say, Africa. It would completely decimate Africa. There would be no Africa left. From Africa, it could spread to Asia, the Middle East, anywhere it pretty much wanted to go. If left unchecked, the world could have an 80 up to maybe an 80% decline in people.
That's absolutely wow.
So,
and it's basically a river of blood.
Now, the signs and symptoms of Ebola are a little bit, different. So, Ebola, the signs and symptoms are, you're going to have fever, sore throat, muscle pain, headaches, vomiting, diarrhea, rash, liver and kidney functions will fail. And you will bleed internally and externally. Which sounds like a, standard trip to Taco Bell.
Oh my gosh. Are you serious?
But Taco Bell has a survival rate of almost 100%.
Not everyone wishes was like that,
Not
though.
everyone, no. So, as far as historical figures who have ever been infected with Ebola, we are unsure. See, Ebola is one of those viruses that could have been out for a long time. A long time. So, let's go back to some of the other things, like the Black Plague. Now, Black Plague was out, and Black Plague did hit Africa. But how many of those deaths, the Black Plague, could have been, or from Ebola, could have been misconstrued as a Black Plague? We didn't have the knowledge that we do today.
We're still trying to figure out what was the plague that caused Rome to fall.
Pretty much. So there is historical evidence that Ebola or a variant of Ebola was back in the day. Okay, we did find like some kind of DNA evidence or something of that nature. Now, Ebola is spread through bodily fluids, contact, open sores, whatever. It's not airborne. But
Like an
Ebola,
STD.
it's not, well, sort of. Sweat, anything that's on your body. And considering you are hemorrhagic and you're bleeding, you're covered in blood that you just can't control. Now, there have been people who have survived Ebola. Those people have Ebola antibodies. And we are trying to use those antibodies to create a vaccine for the Ebola. But we haven't really tested it as far as my knowledge goes. Okay. It would be a life-altering, life-changing fact if we had a vaccine for Ebola. People in Africa, the small African tribes, could get we could eliminate it. But then again, Ebola is also one of those viruses that rapidly evolves. So anything in the Congo, malaria, Ebola, some other things that I just may not know, there's always a chance that there's a mutation. DNA mutates to suit its environment. This much is pretty much basic fact.
That's why influenza has to be given a new vaccine every year.
It's so unstable. It has to be given because it's so unstable because it's always in a form of rapidly changing. Well, Ebola is no different. So while today we may not have an airborne Ebola, that's not saying it's not possible. The military has tried to come up with ways to use Ebola, from biological weapons to
like Mongolians shooting their deads over the walls.
Yes, just like that. It's a biological weapon. Okay, other places have tried. We actually have this stuff, a lot of this stuff locked down, but we can't keep track of everything, so we're not stupid. Could a serious outbreak of this stuff ever really happen in the future? I'm not leaving anything. I'm not saying anything's not possible. It very well could be. We brought Ebola over here after the 2013, 2016 outbreak. Some of our American people had Ebola, were brought over here to be treated. A lot of the U.S. found it like unsafe. Like, what are you doing? Don't do that. You're bringing that here. That would spread horribly fast. And in a sense, they're right. We're too urbanized to have something like this run around. Everybody's up close. Everybody's up close, and people are always in contact. You're always moving. One single person could affect 500,000 people a day, more if you go on subways. It
That's
could be
why COVID was so bad.
COVID gets a bad rap. The thing is, the death toll from COVID is not that bad. Not on a global scale. Okay. You look at things like the flu. On a global scale, the flu kills more people. On a global scale with global numbers, COVID is basically a cold. I don't understand, that part. What I am saying is that this virus, Ebola, if you get infected with it, more than likely, you're going to die. It's not a pleasant death. You will go through Ebola for about 7 days, maybe, if you're lucky. But in those 7 days, it would be the worst pain of your life. Your internal organs, you can't be operated on, so you're just bleeding out. You're bleeding out of your eye sockets. You're bleeding out of your ears, your butt. I mean, it's straight up. It's blood for the blood god. And after that, and some of the most horrible, gut wrenching pains you could imagine, you die. Now, I do stand corrected. There was a test of the vaccine. Of 4 people that were given the vaccine, 1 survived and 3 perished. Now, is that those are bad numbers?
Very
Okay,
bad numbers.
those are very bad numbers. But that
1
does,
in 4
but
chance of survival.
1 in 4. But we at least know that it did have some resistance, and we can modify and improve on that to give it higher numbers. Was it a complete, utter loss of everything?
No.
Nothing ever is. There's always some kind of information you can take back. And unfortunately, that's what we did. But it's fortunate that we did, because now I do know in the process of that, we are making modifications to the vaccine to make it stronger.
With every death in a horror movie, you understand the monster and the killer better.
A little bit. Now, this is a monster and a killer that is constantly, like I said, changing. It's hard to pick up, too, because Ebola is so rare and it's so fast. A person who becomes infected literally has maybe on 2 weeks. Maybe. But how many people did that person infect walking around not even knowing that they were sick? In my opinion, this is probably one of the worst epidemic plagues, whatever, that you could possibly have. 26,000 people in Africa would agree with me. That's how many have died in one of the recent plagues. That was a mortality rate of that village of almost 85%. So it wiped out 85% of that village, and it couldn't. The CDC and the WHO shut that village down. Some of the people survived. They weren't infected. They weren't sick. Didn't have a resistance. They just were smart enough to escape. A person is smart, but people are dumb. A person, if he gets infected with a serious disease, is smart enough to understand that, if I got infected, I can infect everybody else. But people, when they're infected, and you've got 30 or 40 people, and they're all rushing, mass hysteria, rushing into a hospital. I'm sick. Blah, 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 blah. You just spread Ebola to a hospital where people have no resistance because they're in a hospital. This is just one of the many possibilities that can actually happen. Now, like I've said, I can't predict the future. I can learn from the past and predict, but I can't, I can make a guess, but I can't actually predict the future.
You have all of that Viking power, yet you're not clairvoyant.
True.
Yeah.
True. So, is it foreseeable that this could happen? Absolutely. Okay, any major plague can hit at any time. And usually we do have it's like every 2 years we go through a major outbreak of something. But nobody wants to go through a major outbreak of this stuff. With no cure, no vaccine, no symptom relief, no nothing, it just rampages the body. So my question would be, what does Ebola want? It's like any other virus. It wants to replicate and reproduce and everything else, but at the expense of the host. So Ebola doesn't care to kill itself to get what it wants.
All right. Well, with that, let's go to a slightly lighter topic. This week, I am going to give you guys a list of book and movie recommendations so that you can kind of research, or if you're interested in plagues, you might be interested in them. All right, for the book, we got 2 books. Awakenings by Oliver Sacks, the guy that documented the levodopa, the second part of the encephalitis lethargica story. And Get Well Soon by Jennifer Wright. I read this book, and it's a great book about all kinds of diseases, from the Antonine Plague the to cholera, and it documents all these stories about diseases and in a more accessible thing. If you want to learn more about encephalitis, lethargica, lobotomies, the dancing plague, I would recommend checking this book out. For movies, I have two movies right here. Awakenings, which is inspired by the historical story, and the book by Oliver Sacks, which confuses me because main character is Dr. Sayer, but I think it's supposed to be Oliver Sacks. Didn't see Dr. Sayer anywhere.
I just assumed just go with it.
And it stars Robert De Niro and Robin Williams. And then there's Contagion, which from 2011.
Good movie. Good movie.
I like this movie. I watched it during 2020, and I was like, how did this happen? Like 9 years before all this happened. I felt like it predicted the future. Contagion is starring Matt Damon, Lawrence Fishburne, and Jude Law. It's about a, as you guess, a contagion, trying to survive it and finding the original carrier. Do you have any recommendations, Hellfather?
Well, for mine, I would recommend that the CDC website and the WHO are going to have the best historical value as far as information goes for Ebola. Any of the news sites, even the major ones reporting the 2013 to 2016 Ebola outbreak, those are also good articles. As far as movies go, closest one to Ebola that you can find in a movie might be the 1995 movie Outbreak. Outbreak was a movie based on an African virus that was transmitted through a monkey bite, and that virus killed people very quickly. I don't really remember too much about it. I don't think they mentioned Ebola by name, but it very well could have been. I couldn't tell you who the actor is. I don't remember his name, but he's the same dude. It's Dustin Hoffman. There you go. He plays in it. It's a decently good movie. Not a lot of action. Well, not a lot of action. More plague based. How we would actually kind of respond, especially back in the 1990 era.
All right. Thank you all for joining us for this show.
Special edition.
All right. And unlike last time, I actually have an idea of what the next one's going to be.
Special edition to the sequel.
Join us in October for
Blood for the Blood God.
You done?
Yeah, good.
Join us in October for a show about phobias, fears, scares, and
teenagers scare the shit out of me.
One last thing before we end the show. I kind of forgot to do this at the beginning, so it makes sense. But this show is dedicated to my sister, Crimson, and my brother, Wendigo. So, thank you all for joining us for the show, and wish them a happy birthday. Goodbye.
I'll be back.
Yes, he will.